Last weekend, my parents decided I was old enough to babysit my younger brother Charlie while they went out for dinner. I'd been begging them for months, trying to prove I was mature and responsible enough to handle it. They finally gave in, and I couldn't have been more excited to show them I was capable. For the first hour, everything went perfectly. Charlie was in the living room, happily playing with his toys, while I sat on the sofa watching TV. It felt like such a big step towards adulthood, being trusted like that. Though I kept checking the time, feeling a weird mix of pride and nervousness as the evening went on. Then the lights flickered. It wasn't anything too unusual, we've had electrical issues in the past, but it startled me enough to glance over at Charlie. He didn't seem to notice. A few minutes later, the phone rang. I thought it might be Mum or Dad checking in, but when I picked it up, there was nothing on the other end, not even static, just complete silence. I hung up, trying not to let it bother me, but then it rang again. This time I didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail. The lights flickered again, and I started to feel scared. Charlie, sensing my mood, asked if everything was okay. I forced a smile and told him it was fine, but I was starting to feel a tight knot of fear in my stomach. Then the power went out. Everything. Lights, TV, even the comforting hum of the fridge was gone in an instant. The house plunged into complete darkness, except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. Charlie screamed, and I rushed to comfort him, telling him it was just a power cut. That's when the banging started. It came from the front door, loud knocks that made us both jump and force a small scream. I froze for a second, my heart racing, before grabbing Charlie and telling him to stay behind me. I crept towards the door, trying to sound brave as I called out to see who it was. No answer. The banging continued, more insistent this time, like whoever it was wanted to break the door down. I reached for the peephole, hesitating for a moment. Another set of bangs, this time coming from the back door. Panicking, I scooped Charlie into my arms and ran upstairs, locking us both in my parents' bedroom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Charlie was crying, clinging to me, and I didn't know what to do. I pressed my ear against the door, listening, and I could hear footsteps moving around the house. Slow steps, like someone was pacing, looking for something or someone. Then the handle of the bedroom door rattled. I held my breath as the rattling turned into loud, relentless banging. The whole door shook with the force of it. Charlie buried his face in my chest, and I could feel my own tears starting to fall. I had never been so terrified in my life. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The footsteps faded and the house fell completely silent. We stayed in that room for what felt like hours, too scared to move. When my parents finally came home, I burst into tears the second I heard their voices. They were horrified when I told them what had happened, but they also told me they were proud of me for keeping Charlie safe. They called the police, who searched the house and the surrounding area but didn't find anything. No signs anyone, no footprints in the garden, nothing. Last night was the most horrifying night of my life. I still don't know how I'm supposed to process what happened. My mum was away for the night. She had a work conference in another city, and she'd left me home alone, trusting me to handle myself. I'm 15, so it's not like it's a big deal to stay alone for a night. I ordered pizza, watched some TV, and got ready for bed without giving it much thought. But around midnight, I started hearing noises. At first, it was faint, just the occasional creak or shuffle. It got louder. Footsteps, slow, footsteps coming from above me. The attic. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal had gotten up there, a raccoon or a bird. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became that these weren't the noises of an animal. I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat and decided to check it out. I know it sounds stupid, but I couldn't just sit there, paralyzed with fear. The attic door was one of those pull-down ladder types, and as I tugged the cord, my hands were trembling so much I thought I'd dropped the flashlight. When I climbed up, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was definitely there. Stale sweat, old food, something sour and damp. I swept the flashlight beam across the space, and that's when I saw a sleeping bag, some empty food wrappers, and a few personal items scattered around. Someone had been living up there. My heart was pounding as I scanned the room, and then I saw him. He was crouched in the corner, his face pale and gaunt, his clothes wrinkled and dirty. But what made my stomach drop, what made my legs almost give out beneath me, was that I recognized him. It was my dad. I hadn't seen him in years. My parents had divorced when I was 8, and it was bad. I didn't know all the details back then, but I knew enough to understand he wasn't a good person. Mum and I had moved a lot since the divorce. New towns, new schools. She always said it was for work, but now I understand the real reason. He kept finding us. And this time he hadn't just found us, he'd moved in. I don't know how long he'd been up there, but judging by the state of his setup, it had to have been weeks. Maybe longer. There was a notebook next to the sleeping bag, and when I flipped through it later, I saw that it was full of notes about me and Mum, what we ate for dinner, what time we went to bed, the shows we watched. He'd been watching us. I scrambled back down the ladder, locking the attic door behind me and calling the police. I tried to call Mum, but she didn't pick up at first, so I left her a panicked voicemail. When the police arrived, they found him still up there. He didn't resist or try to hide. He just sat there, like he thought he belonged there. He told them he just wanted to be close to us again, that living in the attic made him feel like part of the family. Mum came back early this morning. She's shaken, but she's trying to stay strong for me. We're already talking about moving again, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe no matter where we go. The thought that he was up there the whole time, listening to us, watching us, it's something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. I've had some pretty scary moments in my life, but nothing compares to what happened last night. I'm still shaking just thinking about it. I'm a 13-year-old boy, home alone because my mum works late shifts at a care home. She trusts me to be responsible. And to be honest, I usually enjoy having the house to myself. But last night was different. There was a storm rolling in. Heavy rain started early in the evening, and by the time it got dark, the wind was howling wild. I wasn't too bothered, just curled up on the sofa watching something on Netflix. Then, as if the storm wasn't bad enough, the power went out. It wasn't the first time we'd lost power in a storm. I grabbed a torch from the kitchen drawer and decided to make the best of it. I was lighting candles around the living room when I heard a faint noise coming from the back of the house. But then I saw a flashlight beam. It was faint but unmistakable, moving through the hallway just beyond the living room. My heart dropped into my stomach. Someone was in the house. I froze, gripping my torch tightly, not daring to move. My mind was racing. I hadn't heard the front door, so they must have come in through the back. I realized I hadn't locked it after taking out the bins earlier. Stupid mistake, one I'd never make again. The beam of the light swept into the living room for a split second before moving away again. I blew out the candles, then ducked down behind the sofa, barely daring to breathe. Whoever it was, they must have thought the house was empty because they weren't being subtle. I could hear heavy boots on the wooden floor. I had to get out. I crawled on my hands and knees, trying to stay low and quiet. The rain pounding on the roof and the wind outside masked some of the noise, but every little creak of the floorboards felt deafening to me. I made it to the kitchen and was about to head for the back door when I remembered it was still unlocked. If I opened it, the noise would give me away. I changed my plan, deciding to hide instead. There's a small pantry cupboard in the kitchen, just big enough for me to squeeze into. I slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as I could, and turned off my torch. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he'd hear it if he came close. From inside the cupboard, I could hear him moving through the house. He was opening drawers, cupboards, muttering to himself occasionally. He didn't sound angry, just focused, the kind of focus that made my blood run cold. Then the footsteps came closer. I could see the beam of his flashlight through the slats of the cupboard door sweeping across the kitchen. It paused on the pantry for a moment, and I held my breath. He didn't open it. After what felt like an eternity, the light moved away and the footsteps grew fainter. I stayed in that cupboard for what must have been an hour, too terrified to move. Eventually, I heard the back door open and shut. I waited another 15 minutes before I dared to come out. When I finally did, the house was eerily silent except for the storm. I checked every room, still holding my torch and a kitchen knife I'd grabbed for protection. He was gone. The living room drawers had been rifled through, and my mum's jewellery box was missing from her bedroom. He'd taken some cash we kept in the kitchen too, but he hadn't hurt me. Mum came home about an hour later, and when I told her what happened, she was horrified. The police came and took a statement, but they said it was unlikely they'd catch him. I don't care about the stuff he stole. I'm just grateful he didn't find me. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't hidden in time, if he'd checked that pantry. It's a thought that'll probably haunt me for a long time. Yesterday was supposed to be uneventful. I was home alone waiting for someone to come and fix our fridge. It had been acting up for days, and Mum arranged for a repair technician to swing by in the afternoon. She couldn't take the day off work, so she left me in charge. The guy showed up right on time, wearing a uniform with the company logo stitched on the chest. He looked completely normal, maybe mid-40s, short-cropped hair, carrying a toolbox. I let him in, showed him to the kitchen, and he got straight to work. At least I thought he did. It wasn't until about 15 minutes in that I started feeling uneasy. He wasn't really doing much, just opening and closing the fridge, standing there like he was thinking. He didn't take any tools out, didn't seem to know what he was looking for. At one point, I caught him glancing at me from the corner of his eye like he was checking if I was watching. After about half an hour, he asked me if anyone else was home. I lied and said my dad was upstairs sleeping. His face changed for a split second, just long enough for me to catch it, like he didn't believe me. That's when I started to panic. I didn't want to show it, though. I stayed in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone while keeping an ear out. He was still in the kitchen, making weird noises, opening and closing drawers and muttering to himself. It wasn't until I heard him opening the back door that I decided to sneak a peek. I crept down the hall and peeked into the kitchen. He was standing there with the door wide open, looking out into the garden. His toolbox was on the floor, but it was still closed. He hadn't taken out a single tool. Something about the way he was standing made my stomach drop. He wasn't looking at the fridge or anything related to the job. He was just staring, like he was waiting for something or someone. I realized I had to get out of the house. I grabbed my keys and slipped on my shoes as quietly as I could. I didn't want to go out the front door because it was too close to the kitchen, so I decided to use the sliding door in the living room. As I was unlocking it, I heard footsteps. He was coming down the hall. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out, but I managed to slide the door open just enough to squeeze through. I stepped out onto the patio and pulled it shut behind me, praying he wouldn't notice. I crouched down behind the patio furniture, trying to calm my breathing. Through the glass, I saw him step into the living room. He was looking around, his head turning slowly like he was searching for something or someone. Then he stopped. He bent down and picked up one of my shoes, the one I'd forgotten to put away. He turned it over in his hand, staring at it like he was trying to figure something out. That's when I bolted. I ran around the side of the house and out onto the street. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block. My phone was still in my hand, so I called Mum and told her everything. She left work immediately and called the police. When they arrived, the guy was gone. His van was still parked out front, but he'd disappeared. They searched the house but didn't find anything unusual. No tools, no stolen items, nothing. Mum contacted the repair company and they confirmed what I already suspected. They hadn't sent anyone. I've always struggled with sleeping in total silence. It makes my mind race. For the past few months, I've been using an app to play ambient noise while I sleep. Rain sounds, soft wind, that sort of thing. It helps drown out the stillness of the house. The app also has a neat feature where it records overnight sounds, like if you snore or talk in your sleep. I never paid much attention to that feature, but occasionally I'd listen back just for a laugh. Nothing too exciting, just the occasional creak of the house settling or a random sigh as I turned over. A few nights ago, I decided to listen to the recording from the night before. It started out as usual, just the faint rustle of my sheets and some light breathing. But then, about halfway through, I heard something I couldn't explain. It was faint at first, like breathing. Not mine, it was heavier, slower, and didn't match the rhythm of my own. It got louder, then I heard footsteps, soft but distinct. They creaked across the floorboards in my hallway, slow. My heart sank as I realized they were approaching my bedroom door. The app had perfectly picked up the sound of my door handle moving ever so slightly. It always clicks faintly when it's touched. The breathing got closer. I felt sick when I heard the footsteps continue into my room. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The sound of someone walking on the carpet, their pace cautious. And then came the part that still keeps me up at night. The breathing stopped right next to my bed. I had been asleep the entire time. I didn't wake up. I didn't hear a thing. I was alone that night. No one else lives with me, and I don't have any pets. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be in my house. Yet the recording was there, clear as day, proving that someone had been. I spent hours combing through my house after I heard it. I checked every lock, every window, every corner where someone might have hidden. Nothing was out of place, nothing was missing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I've gone back through older recordings since then, and I've found the same thing on multiple nights. The breathing, the footsteps, it wasn't the first time. This all started about 2 weeks ago. At first we thought we were just being paranoid. Little things didn't seem right. The back door would sometimes be unlocked even though we swore we'd locked it, or objects in the house would feel slightly out of place. But life gets busy, thinking it was just forgetfulness. Then my wife found the camera. She was doing a weekend deep clean, dusting off shelves in the living room, when she noticed something wedged between the books on the top shelf. It was small, barely noticeable, but when she pulled it out, she realized it was a hidden camera. The panic set in immediately. I thought maybe it was a joke, but the thing was real, complete with a memory card. We didn't know what to do at first. We argued about whether to call the police, but curiosity got the better of us. I plugged the card into the computer to see what was on it. It was us. Weeks worth of footage of our living room. We saw ourselves sitting on the couch, eating dinner, watching TV, all mundane, normal things. The camera had been there for ages and someone had been watching us the entire time. We tore the house apart after that, checked every nook and cranny, every shelf, every vent. We didn't find any more cameras, and for a moment I thought maybe we'd found the only one, but then my daughter came to us. She'd found something worse. She was going through her phone that evening, deleting old photos to clear up some storage, when she saw a video. She clicked on it and her face turned pale. It was a recording of her room in the middle of the night. The angle was low, like it had been filmed from the floor, and it showed her asleep in bed. She hadn't taken the video. Someone else had. That was when we all checked our phones, and every one of us found similar videos. My wife had footage of her and me sleeping in our bedroom. My son had videos taken from his desk, showing him working on his laptop. Even I had a clip. Someone had filmed me in the kitchen, standing by the sink, completely unaware. The timestamps on the videos were recent. Some were from the previous week, others were from just days ago. It was a level of invasion I couldn't even comprehend. Someone had been inside our house, not just watching us from cameras, but physically in our space, moving around while we slept, recording us. We called the police that night. They came out and did a full sweep of the house. They didn't find anything else, but the damage was already done. Whoever it was, they had our footage, and they had been inside our home multiple times without us knowing. The police said they'd investigate, but we haven't heard anything yet. Meanwhile, we've replaced every lock, installed an alarm system, and covered every possible entrance with cameras of our own, but none of it makes me feel safe. I wasn't planning to stay home for the holidays, but after a hectic term at uni, I thought it might be nice to have some time to myself. My parents had already made plans to go away, so the house was empty, giving me the perfect chance to relax and recharge. Or so I thought. The first night was fine. I binge-watched some series, made a huge bowl of popcorn and enjoyed the quiet. But on the second night I started hearing noises. Soft scurrying sounds coming from the attic. I assumed it was just a squirrel or a bird that had gotten in somehow. It's an old house, and we've had critters sneak in before. I made a mental note to tell my parents when they got back so they could call someone to deal with it. Meanwhile, I just cranked up the volume on the TV and tried to forget about it, but the noises didn't stop. Every night, the scurrying continued. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps, just barely audible, but enough to make me pause whatever I was doing. Then I started noticing other things. Food went missing. I'd make a sandwich, leave it in the fridge, and come back to find half of it gone. Wrappers from snacks I hadn't touched would appear in the bin. A loaf of bread vanished completely. It wasn't just the food. The house started to smell strange, like damp clothes and something else I couldn't place. I assumed it was related to whatever animal was in the attic. I even started leaving traps out, thinking maybe it was a raccoon or something larger than a squirrel. But then, one night, I woke up around 3 a.m. because of a loud thud. It was definitely coming from the attic. My heart was racing as I lay in bed, straining to hear what might come next. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I decided to check the attic. I grabbed a torch and climbed the rickety ladder, fully expecting to find a nest or some sort of animal mess. What I found was so much worse. There was a small hidden area in the attic, tucked behind some old furniture and boxes. It wasn't part of the main space and could easily be missed if you weren't looking for it. Inside, I found a makeshift bed made from old blankets and a sleeping bag I didn't recognize. There were empty food wrappers scattered everywhere and a collection of my things, clothes, photos, even my toothbrush. Someone had been living in my house. I stumbled back down the ladder, shaking. My first instinct was to call the police, but as I reached for my phone, something on the kitchen table caught my eye. A note, written in shaky handwriting. It said, "I just wanted to be close to you." I froze, my mind was racing. Who would do this? Then it clicked. There was a guy in one of my classes, a quiet, awkward guy who always tried to sit near me. He'd asked me out once, declared his love for me. I'd politely declined. After that, he never said anything, but he kept following me. Wherever I went, he was right behind me. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I left the house immediately and called the police from a neighbor's place. They came and searched the attic, but whoever had been staying there was gone. The officers told me it looked like he'd left in a hurry, probably because I'd disturbed his hiding spot. Last night was supposed to be a quiet evening in. My partner and I had plans to curl up and watch a film while the storm rolled in. It started as cozy as we'd hoped, the rain hammering against the windows, the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. Then, right after the storm hit its peak, the power went out. It wasn't a huge deal. We lit some candles, found a couple of torches, and settled on the sofa to wait it out. The house was eerily quiet without the hum of appliances, but the sound of the storm filled the void. It was almost relaxing in a strange way. Then our dog started acting up. She's normally calm, even during storms, but suddenly she bolted to the back door, barking like crazy. Her fur was bristling, and she kept growling like she was ready to attack. A few minutes later, she moved to the front of the house, barking even more aggressively. I got up to check, peeking out through the curtains. But the darkness outside was almost impenetrable. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the occasional flash of lightning only made the shadows seem deeper. But then we heard a faint scraping sound at one of the windows. It was soft, barely noticeable over the rain, but once I tuned into it, I couldn't ignore it. It moved, almost like fingers dragging across the glass. Our dog went ballistic, lunging at the window and snarling. The dog's barking didn't scare whoever it was away. Moments later, we heard footsteps on the wooden deck outside. Slow steps that seemed to circle the house. It wasn't the wind or the rain. Someone was out there. We stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps would stop, then start again in another part of the house. At one point, they reached the back door. There was a loud rattling sound, like someone testing the handle. Our dog stood her ground, barking ferociously, but the rattling continued. It was like they weren't even fazed by her. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and stood in the middle of the living room, trying to stay calm. My partner had already called the police, but the storm had knocked out the signal. The phone didn't connect to anything. We were on our own. The footsteps moved around the house again, and then there was banging, sharp hits on the front door. It felt like the walls were vibrating with each impact. Our dog ran back and forth, barking at every noise, and we could hear her claws skittering on the floor. I couldn't tell if the intruder was trying to break the door down or just tormenting us. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The banging ceased. The footsteps disappeared. Even the dog calmed down, though she kept a low growl in her throat. The storm outside continued, but the house fell into silence. It was as if whoever was out there had vanished into thin air. We stayed awake for hours, too scared to move. Eventually the power came back on, and we checked every window and door, but there was no sign of forced entry. Still, the ground outside was churned up with footprints, and the back gate, which we'd locked earlier, was wide open. The police came later that morning, but they didn't do much. We're staying at a friend's place for a few days while we figure out what to do. Last weekend I was babysitting my younger brother while my parents went out for dinner. It was supposed to be an easy night, just watching TV and keeping an eye on him until they got back. I was sitting on the sofa, half watching some kids' show he had on, scrolling through my phone when I heard a knock at the front door. It startled me because it was late, well past the time anyone should be dropping by unannounced. The knock wasn't loud or aggressive, but something about it made me feel uneasy. I got up and told my brother to stay put. As I made my way to the door, I noticed he wasn't watching the TV anymore. Instead, his eyes were wide, staring past me. Before I could even ask him what was wrong, he said the words that froze me in my tracks. "There's someone at the back." I turned to look, and my heart sank. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shadow slipping through the kitchen door, the one I'd forgotten to lock after letting the dog out earlier. Someone was in the house. Without thinking, I grabbed my brother's hand and dragged him upstairs as quietly as I could. My mind was racing. I knew I had to get us somewhere safe, somewhere this person couldn't find us. We ended up in the bathroom, the only room upstairs with a lock. I sat there with my ear pressed to the door, trying to keep my breathing quiet while my brother clung to me, trembling. I could hear movements downstairs, drawers being opened, things being moved around. Whoever it was didn't seem to be in any hurry. After what felt like an eternity, the noises grew louder. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming up the stairs. My brother started to cry, and I pressed my hand over his mouth, trying to muffle the sound. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. I thought that was it. I thought we were done for. But then the footsteps moved away. I waited until the house was silent again before I even dared to move. I knew staying in the bathroom wasn't an option. If they came back and tried the door, we'd have nowhere to go. I decided we had to get out of the house. The only way was through window. I opened the bathroom window as quietly as I could and helped my brother climb out first. He was shaking so badly I was afraid he'd fall, but he made it down. As I was halfway through the window, banging on the bathroom door started. I managed to climb out just before the intruders broke the door down and tried to grab me. We ran barefoot across the garden to our neighbor's house. I banged on their door until they answered, frantic and confused. When we called the police, they told us to stay put while they searched the house. My parents came home soon after, panicked and furious at themselves for leaving us alone. The police didn't find anyone inside, but the back door had been left wide open and several drawers had been rifled through. A few valuables seemed to be missing. They found muddy footprints all around the house. It took days to clean them out of the carpets. Every time I saw them prints, it reminded me of that night. My brother won't be left alone now, he cries, if no one is by his side. I've always been someone who keeps a clean house. It's part of my routine, dusting, vacuuming, wiping down surfaces. My friends joke that my house is spotless enough to eat off the floors. That's why it was so jarring when, last week, while dusting my bookshelf, I noticed something out of place. It was small, barely noticeable unless you were looking directly at it. I thought it was a loose screw or some leftover piece of hardware from the shelf itself. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It was a tiny camera, wedged perfectly between two books, aimed right at my living room. My first thought was denial. Surely this couldn't be real. It had to be a joke. My second thought was panic. If there was a camera there, how long had it been recording? And worse, who put it there? The camera was linked to a small memory card. I hesitated before checking it, unsure if I even wanted to know what it had captured. But curiosity, or maybe dread, got the better of me. I plugged it into my laptop and started scrolling through the files. Most of the clips were mundane. They showed me sitting on the couch watching TV, eating dinner, reading a book. My heart pounded as I opened one of those clips. It was from the middle of the night a few weeks ago. The footage was grainy. Some man, had entered my house. He moved with a bizarre, casual confidence, like he belonged there. He sat on my couch, turned on the TV, muted so I wouldn't wake up, and even went into my kitchen to get a drink. He walked past my bedroom door several times. There were more clips like that. In one, he stood in the doorway of my bedroom just watching me sleep. In another, he rearranged things in my living room. Small, subtle changes I hadn't noticed before. And then there were the mornings where I would wake up feeling like something was off, like a glass was in the wrong place or a blanket wasn't where I'd left it. Now I knew why. The last clip I watched made me sick. It was from the night before I found the camera. The man had entered again, but this time he did something I hadn't seen before. He picked up a photo of me from my mantel, sat down on the couch and spoke to it. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his face, it wasn't anger or hatred. It was obsession. Pure, unfiltered obsession. I called the police immediately. They took the camera and the footage as evidence and assured me they would investigate. But as they asked me questions about anyone who might have had access to my home, a name immediately came to mind. There was a man I used to work with years ago. He'd been friendly at first, overly so, but I thought nothing of it. When his behavior escalated, waiting for me after work, showing up at places he knew I'd be, I reported him. He was fired shortly after, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved away. I hadn't seen or thought of him in years. But now I wonder if he ever really left. I wonder if he's been watching me all this time, waiting for the right moment to insert himself back into my life. I've installed new locks, security cameras, and alarms, but it doesn't feel like enough.